My name is Leonidas Kyriakides. I'm a professor of education research and evaluation at the Department of Education at the University of Cyprus and the coordinator of the ISLE project. I would like, first of all, to thank you for participating in the introductory webinar of our project. As you can see, the ISLE project is entitled Redesigning Primary Education Towards Innovative and Sustainable Learning Environments for Promoting Quality, Equity, and Inclusion. One can see that it has to do with several concepts and constructs. It's a long title, so my role is to provide an overview of the project, and I hope, as Nancy mentioned, that you will find it interesting, and we hope to have you on board during the implementation of this project. Let me first of all refer to the context of the project. And the first point that I like to make has to do with the investments in educational buildings and educational infrastructure across EU. In this transparency, you can see some figures, which we found through the Eurostat, and we think are useful to share with you. First of all, you can see that approximately 15 billion is invested each year in school buildings across Europe. For instance, in 2017, the Eurostat refers to a figure up to 48 billion. In my view, these figures illustrate government's strong commitment to educational infrastructure. And why? Because these investments aim to respond to three different challenges. First of all, to demographic shifts and population changes. Secondly, to environmental and sustainability concerns. And the third one, to the modernization of educational facilities. Let's move now to public spending on education. One can see, for instance, that in 2022, public spending on education was approximately equal to 5% of the EU's GDP. If we move a step forward, we will see that capital investment, including expenditure on school buildings and educational infrastructure, was approximately equal to 8% of total education expenditure. If now we move to the overall education expenditure, we will see that EU countries collectively spent back in 2023 more than 800 billion on education. And this means almost 10% of the total public expenditure and 5% of GDP. What these figures tell us is not only that EU public budgets pay attention to education, but also reveal that we have to find out ways in order to make a good use of investment in education for promoting quality, equity, and inclusion. The second point that I would like to make here is that the project is concerned with primary education, with this specific phase of education. What is the reason? First of all, we know from various longitudinal studies that primary education lays the groundwork for lifelong learning and future academic success. In the transparency, you can also see that we give attention to those competences that are required for 21st century learners. The global education agenda pays special attention to these competences. And we know from literature that primary education plays an important role in developing these competences. What is also important to mention here is that by promoting these competencies, inequalities can also be reduced. This implies that as the establishment of effective primary education can help us to promote not just quality, but also equity and inclusion. What we also know from school effectiveness research is that primary schools have a special effect and differential effect. They are more important when they are effective for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The title of the project has a key word, redesigning primary education. This means that we have to look at the literature on educational reforms. One can see, first of all, that the various educational reforms are adapting to technological, economic, and demographic transformations. However, school improvement research does not pay enough attention to contextual factors, and especially to the design of physical learning environments. One could argue that there are some limitations of traditional classroom models to promote quality, equity, and inclusion. In this project, we see innovative learning environments as a response to the limitations of these traditional classroom models. And this is another issue that has to be taken into account when we refer to the ISLE project. The ISLE project has to do with learning. So one should also think twice about the pedagogies in primary education. And it is acknowledged that although there is a growing interest on establishing innovative and sustainable learning environments, we lack data. There is not enough studies searching for the actual impact of innovative and sustainable learning environments on teaching, and through that, on promoting learning outcomes. We hope that the ISLE project will address this lack of research. In the next part of the transparency, you can also see the three main assumptions of the ISLE project. These, in my view, are in line with the broader EU goals of sustainability and social equity. ISLE is based on the assumption that effectiveness in education can be improved through evidence-informed practices about the use of innovative learning design. And this is the reason that the project is concerned with innovative and sustainable learning environments. In addition, it is claimed that the creation of innovative and sustainable learning environments should not be only a core objective of EU policy framework. These should be used for promoting quality, equity, and inclusion. Finally, the ISLE project is in line with those who argue that the design of school learning environment is an important factor, an important effectiveness factor, which was found to be associated with variation in student learning outcomes. Now, we are talking here about educational transformation. But what is the need for educational transformation? We see three different needs. The first has to do with the limitations of traditional reform approach. What we know is that current educational reform strategies were not in a position to contribute in improving learning outcomes. And this reveals a significant limitation of traditional reform approaches. At the same time, looking at the claims of policymakers and practitioners, we see that they stress the importance of redesigning teaching and learning and for the 21st century. In this context, we argue that the goal should be to develop adaptive, competency-based, and inclusive learning systems. In other words, we are in favor of Darling Hammond's argument back in 2008. A third need comes from the fact that traditional reform approaches do not pay attention to the school and teachers' role in designing and using ISLES for promoting quality, equity, and inclusion. So what we argue in this project is that school leaders and teachers' competences and practices are central, and they need to be considered in our attempt to maximize the impact of those investments in educational infrastructure, which were mentioned basically at the beginning of my presentation. Let's move now to the definitions. First of all, the definition that is adapted for the term learning environment. This is basically informed by 4 decades of research on learning environments, and it is taken into account that innovative learning environments should be flexible and student-centered, and they should aim to promote not only student learning outcomes, but also collaboration, inclusivity, and adaptability. Another central assumption is the need for an alignment between space and pedagogy. Basically, the ISLE argues that teaching and learning approaches should align with the physical environment, and this alignment is essential for ensuring quality, equity, and inclusion. Let's move now to how learning environment is conceptualized. 3 key dimensions of innovative learning environments are basically considered. The first one has to do with the physical dimension of learning environment, and it is concerned with the architectural and spatial design of the learning environment. The second has to do with the pedagogical dimension and is concerned with the teaching methods and the learning strategies that are used in order to promote quality, equity, and inclusion. And the third one with the psychosocial dimension. In other words, with the relationships, the culture, the emotional climate, those that they shape learning experiences. Let me spend a few minutes to clarify more each of these 3 dimensions. When we refer to the physical learning environment, we basically refer to the tangible and structural aspects of the school space. These include, among others, the built elements. You see some examples in the transparency, walls, windows, flooring, design features, such as the layout, the spatial organization, indoor environment quality, technology and digital infrastructure, furniture and ergonomics, aesthetic and atmosphere, and obviously not only indoor, but also outdoor and alternative spaces that can be used in order to provide further learning opportunities beyond those that are included in the typical curriculum of a school. If we move now to the pedagogical learning environment, the second dimension, one could refer to instructional strategies and practices that facilitate learning. More specifically, we refer to the various instructional approaches that can be used, such as inquiry-based approach, project-based, and blended learning. And our argument here is that schools should not make use of a single approach, but an integrated approach to effective teaching should be adapted. Learning activities and digital tools are also seen essential. But which learning activities and digital tools? Those that they foster engagement and collaboration. Assessment cannot be ignored. It's part of what takes place in a classroom. But here, the emphasis is not on assessment of learning, but on assessment for learning. In other words, the mechanism of assessment should promote the formative purpose of assessment, should help teachers identify students' learning needs, and provide support to students to address these needs. Finally, student experience is taken into account. Student participation, student voice, inclusion, differentiation, and autonomy are aspects that we look when we examine the pedagogical learning environment. Let me now move to the third dimension, the psychosocial learning environment. This, as it was explained earlier, has to do with the emotional and the social climate. So key elements of this third dimension has to do with the sense of belonging, the safety, students' trust, motivation, engagement, and on top of that, on relationships and interactions among students and interactions between students and teachers, which at the end of the day can promote learning. We can now move to the three main targets of this project. The project attempts to contribute in promoting quality, equity, and inclusion. Let me spend a couple of minutes on defining these three targets. First of all, we treat quality, equity, and inclusion as distinct, but at the same time, interrelated constructs. We also argue that together they form the foundation for establishing not only effective schools, but also fair and inclusive primary schools. Let's go and see what we mean by quality in education. It is, first of all, taken into account that quality is a multidimensional concept. It has to do with the promotion of student learning. And here, let me remind you that we refer to all domains of learning, not just the cognitive, but also the psychomotor, the metacognitive, and the affective domain, including well-being. When we look at quality, we usually search for factors that are associated with the quality dimension of effectiveness. These factors operate at different levels. The project is looking at a significant factor, the innovative school learning environment. However, the factors can also be classified by considering whether they refer to input, processes, or outcomes variables. For instance, input variables have to do with the resources of a school and how these are used. Processes, as it was explained earlier, with the instructional practices, including assessment and student engagement, and outcomes with the promotion of student learning outcomes, including well-being. If we move now to the equity, then you will all agree with me that equity in education refers to providing fair and just opportunities for all learners. That's quite clear, I believe. But at the same time, equity acknowledges that learners may have different needs, and differentiated support should be provided. If we like to become more specific, then one should emphasize here that the project adopts the fairness perspective of equity, which basically tell us that we should attempt to reduce the impact of student background factors on student learning outcomes, and which student background factors, those that are unlikely to change, such as SES, gender, and ethnicity, in order to develop a more fair schools. In regard to inclusion, what we mean by the term inclusion in education is the creation of learning environments where all students feel valued, respected, and supported. This basically means that barriers to participation should be removed in order to ensure that every learner can succeed. In more practical ways, this means that schools should provide equal opportunities for success for all learners. Having described briefly the background of the project, the context, and the main definitions that are adopted, I would like now to give you some information about the ISLE project. First of all, in this transparency, you can see the 10 partner organizations, which are coming from 7 different countries: Cyprus, Finland, Greece, Italy, Latvia, Spain, and Sweden. Later on, presentations will follow, where you will have the chance to learn about each organization. Now, let's move to the duration of the project. This is a 3-year project. It has started back in April, and we hope that by the end of March 2028, we will achieve the main aims of this project. In this transparency, you can also find information about the vision and the purpose of the project. In regard to the vision, this has to do with the establishment of high quality and inclusive primary education across Europe. If we now like to move to the general purpose of the project, as you can see, we will try to support teachers and head teachers to establish innovative and sustainable learning environments. The emphasis on teachers and head teachers has already been mentioned, I believe, in my earlier slides, and we argue here that by supporting teachers and head teachers to develop their skills, student learning outcomes will be promoted, and disadvantaged students will also receive those learning opportunities that are not always available for them. To achieve this purpose, we split it into 3 specific objectives. Objective number 1 has to do with the current policies. What we'll try to do is, first of all, to analyze the current policies that aim to support schools to establish innovative and sustainable learning environments, and then move on and identify needs and challenges. Then we will try to use this data in order to identify ways to support teachers, both pre-service and in-service teachers and head teachers, in order to develop skills which are essential for designing innovative and sustainable learning environments. And let me remind you that the ultimate aim is not just to establish innovative and sustainable learning environments, but environments which will ultimately support student learning, inclusion, and well-being. The objective 3 has to do with the policy, and our aim is to go back and provide suggestions on how policies can be improved. And this will obviously based on an evidence-based approach. And what is our aim is to provide tailored school policies aiming at establishing innovative and sustainable learning environments across Europe. Then the next point is what we expect to achieve. What are the main outputs? 5 main outputs. The first has to do with the establishment of an international network. A network where educators of teachers and student teachers can participate, and stakeholders can also share their views. The colleagues from Latvia will give us later on information of what we have done so far in order to establish such a network. The second output is related to objective number 1. We will try to map the current policies and systems needs in order to support in redesigning the learning environments. Outputs number 3 and 4 are related to objective 2. So output number 2 has to do with the development of a school-wide professional development program. And this program will be based, obviously, on the results of output number 2. We will not only provide a new school-wide professional development program, but our intention is to see what can be done in practice. So output 4 has to do with implementation and evaluation of school-based learning activities based on mobility schemes. Output 3 and 4, therefore, have to do with our aim to have an impact on developing the competences of teachers, student teachers, and school leaders. Finally, output 5, the policy development and scalability, has to do with objective 3. Let me, at this point, refer to the 4 main phases of the ISLE project very briefly. The first one has to do with the first output and with the establishment of a collaborative international learning community. I will very briefly refer to that, since we will hear more about ISLE project in the following presentation. Let me simply mention here that we have already conducted a mapping of the educational stakeholders, practitioners, and policymakers in each country, and a network, a learning community, the ISLE network, we hope that will be established by April 26. This network will allow cross-country collaboration and dialogue, which basically means that it will give us the opportunity to exchange knowledge and experiences. And ultimately, by the end of the project, we hope that we will establish a culture of mutual support, trust, and respect. We see this network as very critical. The members of this network will help us to develop all our outputs. I consider them as our critical friends. They will help us during our attempt to do the mapping of the policies and the identifications of the system's needs. I also expect to listen very carefully to them during the implementation of the ISLE Professional Development Program, and we will make a use of these members during the development of policy recommendations, which can help us to reach to the output number 5. As you can see, annual network meetings will take place, policy workshops, and other activities in order to help us develop the outputs of the ISLE project. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of you who will join us in our attempt to establish this ISLE network. Phase 2 is related to Objective 1, to the Output 2, and it has to do with the mapping of policies and systems needs. We have already conducted a desk research to map existing policies at each country, and in the next 3 months, from October till December, field research is going to be conducted in order to identify school level and system level needs. At this point, it's important to mention that we'll try to investigate both in-service teachers and school leaders' views about the challenges and their needs, and the findings of this investigation will help us to develop the professional development program that comes through the phase 3. We will also look at stakeholders' views to find out their views about the current policies and their views about systemic needs. By July, we hope that we'll be in a position to produce not only national mapping reports, but also a transnational mapping report that can guide us for the next phase, the third phase of the project, which is concerned with the development of a school-wide professional development program. This program will be designed and delivered both to in-service and pre-service teachers and school leaders. Let me, at this point, mention that accreditation of the training will be provided to all trainees. What is our plan? From February till October, we will try to develop this professional development program by considering the findings of the desk and field research. E-handbook and 7 e-learning courses will be produced and will all be available in all national languages. During the next school year, from September till June, we will have the chance to implement and evaluate the school-wide professional development program. For this reason, training will be offered. In the transparency, you can see the various methods that we'll use to provide training. Let me only mention at this point that we also take care of student teachers, so pre-service teachers will also have the chance to be trained through study visits. During the implementation, support will be provided from an advisory and research team. This advisory and research team will not only help schools develop their own action plans, but it will be there to support them during the implementation and the redesign of their action plans. As I mentioned earlier, we will also evaluate this intervention. For this reason, 2 measurement phases will take place, one at the beginning of the school year and the other at the end of the school year. The intention is to measure the impact of this attempt, and for this reason, by February 28, a report discussing the impact of the intervention will be available. Both within and cross-country analysis will be conducted. Phase 4 has to do with policy formulation and scalability, the third objective of the project. The fifth output. In the last year of the project, from May 27 till March 28, we will try to formulate a theory-driven and evidence-based policy recommendations. And in order to do that, we will not only consider the results of the previous phases of the project, but we will also run local and international policy workshops. We will also consider the results of the annual meetings of the International Learning Network. And for this reason that in my earlier slide, I mentioned that we believe that the network has a very critical role to play in our attempt to achieve our aims. The intention is by the end of the project to manage to develop some policy recommendations and a relevant report. Let me, during the few minutes that I have, to refer to a critical question that our guests may have. Who will benefit from the project and how? We see, first of all, three important target groups: educators of teachers and student teachers, in-service teachers and school leaders, and pre-service teachers. What are the benefits for this target group? I see two ways. The first has to do with their participation in the professional development program. We hope that designing and implementing innovative and sustainable learning environments will help them to develop their competences. Let me also stress here that receiving feedback and support during practical application in schools is another benefit that they will get. Feedback will come not only from their own country team, but also from other country teams. We also hope that teachers and leaders, school leaders, will have the chance to gain access to innovative teaching methodologies. Benefits will also come through the participation in the ISLE network. For instance, they will have the chance to collaborate with peers, to share best practices, to exchange ideas with peers and other professionals, and enhance visibility of their work. We also hope that through the implementation and evaluation phase, their students will get some benefits. The ISLE project hopes to have an indirect impact on primary students, supporting them to improve their experiences and through that their student learning outcomes. The second group has to do with all the other educational stakeholders, including researchers and policymakers. What are the benefits for them? The first comes from the participation in the network. The ISLE network will give them the chance to gain access to a platform for cross-national dialogue and policy exchange in a topic that is central for them, the establishment of innovative and sustainable learning environments. Participation in policy formulation and scalability is also important for them. Why? Because through the workshops, they will have the chance to exchange ideas, to reflect, and gain better knowledge about the effectiveness of future policies and upcoming educational reforms. For this reason, I would like, first of all, to thank you not only for joining us in this introductory webinar, but also for your attention. And as I mentioned earlier, I hope to have you on board during the implementation of this project and to have you with us during the first meeting of our ISLE network. Thanks for your attention.